Hello everybody, it's Mr. Cooper here once again, and I'm here today to talk to you about the WEK Mastery Curriculum. So it is our aim at WEK to create lifelong learners. So the outcomes of this engagement video, these 4 questions will be answered. First of all, why as a school did we choose the Mastery Curriculum? What is the Mastery Curriculum? What does mastery look like in the classroom? And also, how do we track and report the children's progress through the mastery curriculum? So the first thing I want to explain to you today is exactly why we chose the mastery curriculum. First of all, it was announced in the UK in 2014 that curriculum levels were to be scrapped and they were not going to be used anymore. So you may have been familiar with the language of 4C, 4B, 4A and those curriculum levels. Those do not exist anymore, and they asked every school to then implement their own assessment system in order to celebrate and record children's achievements in schools. The reason for that was to remove the idea of a best fit level. We don't want to grade and assess children based upon just an overall best fit level, because that doesn't tell you any information about what the child can and can't do within that level, and all the skills that they've been working on that all build up to form that one overall level. Consequently, what happened with the pace of learning was that as soon as a child moved to one level, their next target was to move to the next level. Well, actually, the target should be based upon what the children can and can't do within the level, working on the individual skills. So consequently, children were moved far too quickly through the curriculum levels, and actually some of the skills were left behind and they had gaps in their learning. And so with the new curriculum, it allows us to assess every single skill within the curriculum so that children don't move up the year groups with any gaps in their knowledge and learning. The opposite side is actually, as a society and as education, we want to move away from a knowledge-based curriculum. It's not just about what you know, it's about how you use that in a real-life context. It's about how you use and apply those skills in the real world. It's not just about knowledge anymore, it's also about the skills that you need to acquire in order to be successful. And that's why we have our WEK Learner Profile. Our WEK Learner Profile is how we want the children to use the skills in different ways. So we want them to use skills to be risk takers, to be independent inquirers, to work in teams, to critically think and be reflective. And that's we can compare that to learning to drive. So as adults, when we learn to drive, we don't learn to drive just to pass the test and to be knowledgeable about cars. We learn to drive to be independent. We learn to drive to be safe and responsible. And so we learn to drive to use the car in lots of real life contexts and learn to drive in lots of different ways to support us in society. And that's exactly what we want to do with every single skill in the curriculum. We want the children to use those skills in real life contexts so that they're ready to use them in real life. And so the Mastery Curriculum at WEK is basically the UK National Curriculum. We are British curriculum school, so we use the UK National Curriculum and we combine that with our WEK Learner Profile to define what our Mastery Curriculum is. It is both of these combined, and it's important that we assess and deliver our lessons based upon these 2 key items, the UK National Curriculum and the WEK Learner Profile. And so, when we moved to the Mastery Curriculum, what we needed to do was combine the UK curriculum with the WEK Learner Profile. And so we have created these WEK Mastery documents for every single subject. So here we have a History Mastery Curriculum document for Year 3. All the objectives in our securing box here are all the skills we want our children to acquire in order to be secure in the Year 3 National Curriculum. But then what we've done is we've added the WEK Learner Profile and we've added extra challenges to challenge our children into mastering those skills in a slightly deeper way. We've also set out expectations of the steps that the children need to take in order to start developing those skills. So there's clear steps from developing to securing to mastering that have been set out in school to challenge and support all of our children. And so, now we've set out what the WEK Mastery Curriculum looks like, it's really important now to think about how we deliver that in the classroom and what type of activities the children need to do in order to be successful in the Mastery Curriculum. The learning pyramid helps teachers and students and parents to understand exactly what type of activities allow our students to be successful in lessons. If teachers delivered the curriculum in a lecturing format, that would actually only allow children to remember less than 10% of what has been taught. However, if you allow children to teach others, to practice and do things and explore and to discuss with others, you're much more likely to remember all the things that were in that lesson. And so it's really important that lessons are now as practical and provide opportunities for children to discuss and talk and interact and teach others to allow the children to remember what has exactly been taught. And that is then transferred over to our Bloom's taxonomy of verbs. The type of activities that are encouraged in lessons are linked to how difficult something would be. So if a child is just to know something, they might tell, identify, list, listen or locate. That is actually quite a shallow form of knowledge. It's just about knowing something. If we want children to really remember things and to really get into the depths of understanding, we want children to analyse, evaluate and create. And all these type of activities such as solving, assessing, proposing, planning and creating, these are the type of activities that allow children to remember as much as possible because they're discussing, because they're interacting and because they are doing. And so as our WEK Mastery curriculum is being delivered, the teachers then assess the children's progress through those objectives by describing them in these 4 key words that you should already be familiar with: entering, developing, securing and mastering. A child will start off with entering a mastery curriculum objective, and then we'll move to developing when they're needing less support and they're making less mistakes. And then when they move to securing, the child is using that knowledge in lots of different ways. So we want the children to be secure with all of the mastery curriculum objectives. And indeed, some children will actually exceed that and go into mastering those objectives, and they'll be able to become much more natural using those skills. In the same way, like we drive, when we drive now, because we're so confident about driving a car, certain things like turning the wheel and indicating become much more natural. So, some examples of some mastery challenges. Here we have, this is a task that children might do to develop their learning in maths. So, simply showing what 10 divided by 4 equals. If we turn this into a mastery challenge, use the following calculation to answer the following problems. 10 divided by 4 equals 2.5. But actually, what we want the children to know is what that 2.5 means. If we're talking about children getting into a car, and there's 10 children, and there's 4 seats in each car, we would need 2.5 cars. But actually, we can't have 2.5 cars, so therefore we would need 3 cars. So it's understanding what those numbers represent. In the same way, if we're sharing 10 dirham with 4 children, we could share 2.5 dirham each. But actually, it means that we'd have to give them 50 fills to have that half. And in the same way, if we're sharing 10 presents with 4 children, if we were to make it fair, we can't give everyone 2.5 presents, so we'd only give each child 2 presents. So again, it's getting the children to really explain and understand what exactly that calculation means and represents in a real life situation. In writing, we could ask the child to just use a sentence with 3 adjectives to check whether they know what adjectives are. However, in the mastery curriculum, we might ask them, how might your description choices differ if you discover the monster is friendly or vicious? So yes, we want to know whether they can use adjectives, but also we want to know whether they understand the purpose of adjectives and the influence adjectives can have on someone's opinion of what you're writing about. Learning in reading. We could ask a child, is Roald Dahl speaking to children or adults? If we're looking at the quote on the left-hand side here, and get them to talk about why they think that. Actually, in the mastery curriculum, we could ask them instead, how might Roald Dahl have changed his language if he was writing to an adult? So rather than just looking at the features of that sentence, they're actually looking at the features of a sentence and then suggesting how they might change them to change the purpose and the audience of who Roald Dahl is writing to. And in the same way in science, if we're looking at, for example, the platypus, we could say what animal category would the platypus fit into, a bird or a mammal or a reptile, and explain. So we're testing the children on whether they know exactly what makes a mammal or what makes a bird a bird. However, in the mastery curriculum, we could actually put that into a real life context and look at the historical evidence and get children to explain why UK scientists originally thought the platypus wasn't real when it was first discovered. And again, finally, in history, we could look at this picture and start to unpick the question, how did the Blitz change lives of the UK citizens? So in terms of transport, in terms of business, in terms of all kinds of natures of life, just looking at that picture. However, in the mastery curriculum, we want them to use and apply that knowledge. So instead of just picking out what they think, they actually have to create 5 propaganda slogans that may have been used to keep British morale in World War II, explaining where I've chosen each. So they have to take their understanding of how the Blitz affected the UK, and then they have to then turn that into propaganda statements such as "we can do it," and explain why they think that that would be suitable to help keep British morale high. So they're not just knowing about something, they're not just developing knowledge about various parts of the curriculum, they're actually using it in real life context. Here's something you can do at home: teaching reasoning skills. So our teachers are starting to use this type of language in lessons, these type of activities. Prove it. A prove it activity is a really simple way of children sharing reasoning skills and starting to talk and explain their understanding. So for example, in maths you could say, prove that two two-digit numbers do not always add up to equal 3-digit numbers. So they have to go off and think about what 2-digit numbers could go together that won't necessarily make a 3-digit number. So they have to go off and prove whether the statement is correct or incorrect. Convince me is a similar concept, with the idea of convincing someone that something is true or false. And it doesn't have to be a right or wrong answer. It's really important to remember that actually, if they just generate an opinion and start to explain why, that still is developing the reasoning skills. It's really, really important to support the mastery curriculum. What if is a really good way of getting the children to be creative and predict and use evidence to back that up. So for example, you could ask a question at home: what would happen if Dubai ran out of electricity? They would then use their knowledge that they've gained in school, they would go off and research and start to come up with a prediction of what might happen if Dubai ran out of electricity. Odd one out is a really great one to allow children to start to develop and think deeper about various topics. So you could pick 3 countries if you were looking at geography: Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. Which one is the odd one out? There isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's about getting the children to start to reason and think deeper about a certain topic. They may say that Mexico is the odd one out because of their geography knowledge, but they may look at the flags and realise that Argentina is the odd one out because it's the only one that doesn't have green within their flag. So they can go and investigate lots of different ways and why one of those countries might be the odd one out. And that could be done in art as well: blue, purple, orange. Which one is the odd one out? They may then delve and start to think about different types of colours. So blue and purple are cold colours, orange is a warm colour, so orange is the odd one out. These are simple activities to develop the reasoning skills of children, which really helps them develop those mastery skills, those explanation skills that are vital to the WEK mastery curriculum. Same and different, or better and worse, also allow children to compare 2 different things and say whether they think the subjects are same or different, or whether they're better or worse. For example, Dubai, London, are they similar or different, and in what ways? It gets them to evidence, it gets them to explain, it gets them to reason. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, who was better? You get to think about who was a better monarch in the UK, whether Henry VIII was better or worse than Elizabeth I. And a similar one: always, sometimes, never. Another statement is given and the child has to say whether it is always true, sometimes true, or never true. So for example, touching the ball with your hands in football is always, sometimes, or never a foul. So they have to develop their understanding of football, understand the rules, and then they have to reason and explain why that statement is true all the time, sometimes true, or never true. So this is something that you can do at home to support your child's reasoning skills, and it can be based upon any topic, and they don't always have to be right as long as they're explaining and reasoning why they've made certain choices. So quickly, how do we track and report on children's progress? So it's really vital that by the end of the year the children are secure in all the skills in the curriculum. They may still be developing some of them, but we want most of their objectives to be secure by the end of the year. Over the years that the children go through, they will start off each year with entering, then they will move to developing as they're building confidence, and they will be secure in year 5. However, when they move to year 6, they will then go back into entering because it is a new curriculum, because there are new objectives and new skills to be learnt. They will go to entering, they will then develop those skills, and then they will secure those skills by the end of the year. You may have some children that are mastering in the skills, they're above average, which is absolutely great, but they will still also go back into entering when they go to the next year group. And all this information is shared in your report, so you know exactly what your child is very good at, what they're mastering in, what they're securing, and also the things that they are working on. And that is made very clear in your reports. So, if you do have any more questions about the Mastery Curriculum, about how the Mastery Curriculum is delivered in your year group, then please do talk to your class teacher. They will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for listening to the video. I hope it's been helpful. Have a good day.